Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us again. I'd like to introduce you all to John Markovic, Senior Policy Advisor for BJA, to get us started. John?
Right. I'm just going to kick things off a bit here and put this in context. Today, we'll hear from Ira Holmes and his team with the training and policy he's the training and policy manager at the Office of Justice Programs Grants Financial Management Division. So just to clarify, OJP is the umbrella agency over BJA. BJA is one of the grant components that operates under OJP. So these are essentially federal procurement rules that apply to all Office of Justice Program grants. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to chime in a little bit to talk about how his office intersects with our state policy advisors, so you know who's in what lane if you need to do budget modifications or need help with your procurement process down the line. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ira to start the presentation.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon. And first thing I want to say, thank you for that introduction, John. And also I wanted to say that for everybody who's been asking, we are moving back into in-person financial management training. For those of you that were fortunate enough to register for our first training, it's going to be held October 3rd and 4th. That training is already completely booked up. But we are having another financial management, two-day financial management training on November 1st and 2nd. We have not opened registration for that one yet, so please keep an eye out. We will be opening up registration for that very soon. When we open it, please register immediately, because the first one, I'll be honest, the first one filled up within 5 minutes. So this is very, very popular now that we are moving back into our two-day in-person financial management training. What I'm going to talk about today is going to be the procurement process for anyway. I'm going to give general information, and whenever I can, I'm going to try to be specific about the body-worn camera grant. So let's go right into it. First thing I'm going to do is talk about program requirements. Let me make sure I can do this. Yes. Program requirements applicable to some federal grants. Okay. So the first thing I'll say about your grant, the body-worn camera grant, is that it allows both type of matching requirements, cash and in-kind. Cash is pretty straightforward. We all know what cash matching would be. In-kind matching, let me just say this, the amount that is used for in-kind matching should match the service that's being provided. And what I mean by that is, if you have a person, and I'll give you an example. There was a entity that was providing drug counseling. There was a judge that wanted to help with or assist with the counseling and providing some mentorship. They wanted to use the salary of the judge as part of in-kind. He was not performing services as a judge. And since he was not, we could not use the salary, the judge's salary, but what would have been more applicable or what would have been accepted would have been the salary of a mentor for our counselor for that type of program. So I say all that to say that the amount that is used in kind should match the service that is being provided. And how do you calculate a match? Well, the good thing about the body-worn camera grant is that it is a 50% match. Now, it's not the example that I have here, but let's just start with the amount of the federal award. You start with the amount of federal award, and then you divide it by the federal share. You take that, and that will give you your adjusted project cost. Take the adjusted project cost, multiply by the recipient share, and you get the required match. The example here is using $80,000 with the 80-20 match. $80,000 would be the federal amount, award amount. Divide that by the federal share, 80%, and you'll get $100,000. Multiply that by the recipient share of the 20%, 100,000 times 20% equals $20,000 required match. Now, once again, the good thing about the body-worn camera match is that it is a dollar for dollar. So for every federal dollar, you are matching with your own dollars. So let me use a different example for you. Let's say it's $100,000. The federal award is $100,000 and yours is a 50% match. 50% divided into 100,000 will give us $200,000, which would be your adjusted project cost. Take the adjusted project cost, $200,000, multiply it by 50%, and you're right back at your $100,000, the required match. As I said, with the body-worn camera grant, it is a dollar for dollar. So you're right back at the $100,000. Now, we're going to talk about, I'd like to talk about procurement procedures. And once again, I'm going to give you some general guidance, but at the same time, when I can, I will try to talk about the body-worn camera. I'll try to talk about specific procurement situations for you. Now, first thing, let me say, there is nothing in the uniform guidance, and I refer to the uniform guidance a lot. There is nothing in the uniform guidance that requires you to use federal procurement guidelines. However, it is always encouraged that any state or non-federal entity use your own policies and procedures, unless your own policy and procedures, you don't have any, or your own policy and procedures are more lenient than the federal guidelines. Now, state and non-federal entities should follow your own policies and procedures, as I said. If the state or non-federal entities procedures are more efficient, provide more efficient protection for the federal dollar or for the federal grant, use them. If not, use the federal guidelines. Anyway about it, documentation is key. Documentation is most important, and contract files must be able to create an audit trail. The documentation should be sufficient enough to stand on its own in review. And when I say stand on its own, once again, we're talking about procurement. So it should allow me to understand your entire procurement process. I should be able to find purchase orders. I should be able to see that they are signed by the appropriate authority. I should see invoices. I should see the receipt or documentation of the receipt of the goods. And I should see where the goods are held or where the goods are being held or are held in safekeeping. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about and give you some general guidance on competition. The uniform guidance says that all procurement transactions must be conducted in a manner that provides, and please pay attention to this, full and open competition. That's the most important thing through the uniform guidance. The bidders list should be continually updated. And what we mean by updated is that entities that are out of business should be removed from your bidders list. Entities that are suspended or otherwise prohibited from doing business with the federal government, once again, should be removed. Now, the easy thing about that is that you can go to sam.gov, and that is the best source for parties, for a listing of parties that are prohibited from doing business with the federal government. You should use this kind of, I feel like it's kind of old-fashioned in here to say newspaper, but newspaper or other advertising of the contract is a requirement. So what I'll change that to say is a public announcement for your contract requirements. So however you decide to make that public announcement. The procurement transaction must be conducted in a manner that, I won't say prohibit, but limits local preference. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, a little bit more about that later, but the local preference is frowned upon. I'll just say that. And local preference should only be used when authorized by federal statute. And a sole source contract. So a sole source contract, we also call the non-competitive process. So the federal awarding agency's approval of sole source is required for any contract that is above the simplified acquisition threshold of $250,000. You must, that requires federal approval. If you're below the simplified acquisition threshold, $250,000, then we still ask that you maintain your documentation. Keep documentation so we know how you came up under, how you decided to go sole source or make your sole source selection. Sole source is required when the item of service is available only from a single source, when a true public exigency or an emergency exists in case of a natural disaster is the easiest one I can think of. And only after a competitive solicitation, a competition that has occurred is considered, and all the competition is considered inadequate, then you're allowed to go sole source. Let me say, and I should have said this at the beginning, there's nothing, once again, in the uniform guidance, pointing to the uniform guidance, there's nothing in the uniform guidance that says an organization can't go sole source. However, you must adhere to the uniform guidance, and I'm going to give you the part in the uniform guidance that talks about this. But there's nothing in the uniform guidance that says you can't go sole source. Now, within OJP, we have a tool to help you with your sole source selection, and I'm going to give you the address to that or where you can find that in a moment. A sole source contract is a non-competitive procurement, and a non-competitive sole source procurement is when you procure with non-competitive proposals. You must adhere once again to the uniform guidance, and that is .320 paragraph C. When is sole source approval required by OJP? When a recipient determines that award of a contract through a competitive process is just not feasible. When you've determined that it's just easier, faster, or better for the awarding entity to go sole source. And of course, as I said on the other slide, when you are above the simple acquisition threshold of $250,000. And when documentation must be submitted to OJP for sole source approval. Non-competitive sole source approval GAM, or grant award modification. And you can find that within our Just Grant system. You still, however, in going sole source, you still must adhere to common federally administered requirements that apply to all subawards of OJP awards. So OJP has resources on related topics for this, and here's the address. Once again, I believe you're going to get these slides, or you will have access to these slides and at the end of the presentation. OJP has a toolkit to assess the merits of your sole source approval or your sole source request. Here's the address for the toolkit. Now, some of the things that you should put into your sole source or your non-competitive procurement justification. And this is only a sample. These are recommendations. You should have a brief description of the program and what the product or service that you are looking to acquire. You should have an explanation of why it's necessary to go sole source. That could include the organization or organization's expertise. It could include the management team of the organization that you're working with, their knowledge of the program, their past working with them, including their responsiveness in the past, expertise of their staff, and their ability to get things done. All of these items will assist the awarding agency in assessing your sole source justification. Other things to have, you should have a description of the results of any survey that you've done that helps justify you going sole source, the type of service or product that you're looking for. If you did not conduct a survey, an explanation as to why you did not. A statement of when contractual coverage is required, and if the dates are not met, what impact it would have, or what impact it could have on your program. Let me give you an example. If there was a provider of dash cams to your organization, and that same provider says they can now provide body-worn cameras. Well, they know your organization, they know your personnel, they even may have a good idea of your procurement process. So working with them would be more efficient. Include that in your justification. Also in your justification, I'll say this, the easiest thing to say is more the better. So any other points that you have to, and I have in quotes here, just sell your case. A declaration that the action is in going sole source is in the best interest of the awarding agency or in the best interest of the federal government. And in anything you've done to show that there is no conflict of interest, no conflict of interest in fact, or no conflict of interest in appearance. You want to make sure if there's any hint of conflict of interest, that you include that in your sole source justification. One thing, it should be number 8 here, but where it says note here on the slide, where it says time constraints would not be considered a factor in if the grantee has not sought competitive bids in a timely manner. What that means is, or what we have seen is grantees that wait around. So if you wait around until it gets too late, and then you said, and then the entity says, well, it's too late, we have to go sole source, we don't have time for a competitive bidding situation. That will not be accepted as a sole source justification. Here's a little chart that shows contracting do's and don'ts. First thing, as I said, compete. When you can, when it's necessary, it's practical, please enter an open, fair competition. Prepare an IFB, which is an invitation for bids, and invitation for bids just means you are price driven, or an RFP, which is a request for proposal. Maintain, and I want to stick a word in here, maintain an updated bidders list. Make sure your bidders list is updated, and remember what I said about going to sam.gov, and you can see who has been excluded from doing business with the federal government. They should, once again, those names should be removed. Conduct interviews. Assess everyone that you are considering, procuring a service or product from. If necessary, obtain any and all prior approvals, and uniform guidance will tell you where prior approval is required. Make documentation available for review. And there's one, I'm going to add one other do here, maintain the documentation. Make sure that you have access to it so anybody doing a review can have access to that documentation. Contracting don'ts. Don't place any unreasonable requirements in your solicitation. Don't require, and unreasonable, I'll lump these two together. Don't require any unnecessary experience. Don't, when it's not necessary, don't say we have to have a PhD. Don't engage in any non-competitive pricing. Don't engage in any organization conflicts of interest. Remember I said in fact or in appearance, conflicts of interest. And make sure you don't have an unreasonable time frame. Here's the address, even though I think everyone in the audience probably already knows it. Here's the address to sam.gov, and that's where you can find a list of organizations that are prohibited from doing business with the federal government. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes to talk about updates to the uniform guidance. The financial changes that have been made, and this is the part that has been updated, and it's not really an update, but more of a classification. .320 took the methods of procurement and made them and put them into three distinct categories. The first one, informal methods, micro purchase, and small purchase. The second, formal methods, they were called sealed bids and proposals. And the third, the non-competitive, sole source, which we just talked about. The other another change was the non-federal entity may establish a micro purchase threshold that is higher than the amount set in the FAR. It used to be $3,000. Now it is up to $10,000. However, a non-federal entity may self-certify a threshold up to $50,000 on an annual basis. However, you must provide supporting documentation as outlined again in .320. Now, that is an annual self-certification and provide documentation annually. And a domestic preference, and .322 talks about a federal entity should, to the greatest extent practicable, under a federal award, provide a preference for the purchase, acquisition, or use of goods, products, or materials produced in the United States. Now, that is the exact language from the paragraph. The language must also be included in any sub-awards and contracts. And what I mean by that is that it is passed down from you to any sub-recipients. The same thing, produced, purchased, and in the United States. Now I'm going to turn it over to John, and he's going to talk about OCFO and BJA programs and staff.
Great, thanks, Ira. So I think, keep in mind the thresholds that Ira discussed in this session, particularly the $250,000 threshold. I just want to clarify, the OCFO kind of oversees these procurement processes. And Ira, thanks for putting in that example about the in-dash camera company and then an agency continuing with that same vendor for their body worn camera program. I think that's a great example. You saved me from asking that question. We have a lot of agencies that, use their kind of pivot off their in-dash camera, or agencies that start with a pilot program or partial implementation of their body worn cameras and then come back to expand the program. And it does make sense for the reasons that you stated, often makes sense for them to stay with the same vendor. So that's a great example. So I think if you have questions about these procurement rules, your first point of contact should be your state policy advisor. They're the person within BJA that handles the administrative elements of your grant, including, overseeing your reporting, your financial reporting, your performance management reporting. If you submit a grant adjustment modification, either change in scope or a budget modification, those are the people you should talk to. If we don't have an immediate answer, the state policy advisors, their supervisor, and I will work with OCFO to get you an answer. So we discussed this in the office hours section today. I promise I'd have this to you. So Way White is handling basically any states A through D, which I think is Delaware, and then also Georgia. And then Gerardo Velasquez, he's sort of our longstanding state policy advisor on this program, has the lion's share of awards. It's any award to Florida or states beginning with H to P, including Puerto Rico. And then Gail Farquhar has the remainder of the alphabet. Remember that we're here to help you. Don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have procurement questions or other questions about grant administration. This is just a little bit about swimming in the lanes. As I mentioned, the Office of Management Budget, OCFO, they oversee grants and technical assistance to all of OJP's program offices, including BJA, BJS, the National Institute of Justice, OJJDP, and the SMART office. So the Bureau of Justice Assistance is under that program, and we administer the body-worn camera policy. I know sometimes those of you who might be involved in only the administration or financial elements get these acronyms mixed up. So I'm just trying to provide some clarity there. And then within BJA, we have the programs office that handles the majority of the administrative and task reporting issues. Again, your state policy advisor, either Gerardo, Way, or Gail. And then the policy office, which is me, handles the content and direction of the grant program, including defining the core objectives and deliverables. And I work hand in hand with the programs office and the TTA providers in overseeing the program. Most of you are a year into the grant program. The one special condition that applies to this grant is the development of a comprehensive policy that's done deliberately and with broad stakeholder input. Many of you have gone through either the self-certification process or the scorecard with CNA. If you haven't got through that process, you should contact your CNA team or reach out to me to provide that information to you. It's critical that you get that done. That's a special condition of our funding. And that's really addresses the last bullet point that the TTA provider, the CNA, has been working for years on this grant. They're there to work hand in hand with you on getting that policy condition cleared, working with you to get a sound policy. So you should have been in touch with them about that. I think the majority of the agencies on this call are in that position. If not, you can contact me and I'll get you in contact with them. These are the contact information for the state policy advisors, Gerardo, Way, and Gail. Hopefully all those states are color-coded quickly. I quickly updated last year's slide, but follow the letters in the boxes to the right. And most of you, I think, are already familiar with. You would have had contact with your SPAs by this time. And here is the contact information for OCFO and the office hours. Again, probably for body-worn cameras, probably it's good to reach out to your state policy advisor so we can funnel it to Ira and his team, because there's some unique considerations for the body-worn camera program, including the $2,000 per body worn camera cap we have on the federal funding side. We always want to make sure that if you do a budget modification, you stay in compliance with that, and we can clarify that for you. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to questions.
We don't have any questions in the chat. We can go ahead and end, John, if you'd like, but
Thanks, Ira, and your team. I think it was a very efficient presentation.